Welcome, holy friends. How exciting it is that we still find a way to be together, even though I will miss giving you your little badges and sitting next to Billy and saying hello and all that wonderful meals that we share together annually on Zayin Adar. But it is beautiful for all of us to be together. And what a year it has been. So many of us have been derailed from our volunteer deployment of Tahara, and we started Shemira conversations and weren't able to get that off the ground because people opted not to have it, not because we weren't willing. And of course, those who are our escorts on Shabbat and serving as Shiva volunteers, just knowing that our community has created such a beautiful, expansive Chevra Kadisha is beautiful. But I do want to take a moment to give a big shout out to Susan Grodnick, who has continued to organize our Shloshim call. So if you want to go down and give her a little extra reaction, like a heart, and just say, thank you, thank you, thank you, Susan. You've been amazing. You are amazing. And of course, to my co-chairs, Sharon and Bob, who are forever present. So this year, since we met for Zayin Adar last year, we have had 78 deaths in our community, members as well as loved ones. And, let's just take a moment of silence. To really hold these blessed souls in our hearts, knowing that we are forever connected to them in some way. And hopefully they have each found their place in Olam Haba. And we remember them tonight. And I also want to offer gratitude to each one of you who contributed to our matching fund. We far surpassed our goal of $1,800 that BJ is matching. Thank you so much for that, in lieu of us having a dinner together to help those in our neighborhood and beyond who are food insecure and hungry. One of the noblest tasks we can offer. So I pass this on to you, Billy. And again, so nice for us to be together this evening.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. Before we begin with our speakers, we are very blessed to have our newest rabbi, Becca Weintraub, is to lead us in a text study to ground us, which I ground us with some text.
Great. Thank you, Billy. I wasn't sure if we were going to start with text or start a little bit with our panelists. So I'm so excited to be here with everyone and just taking it in. I know some faces I've seen before and some I haven't had the chance to connect with yet. And I feel very blessed to be here commemorating and celebrating Zayin Adar, even though it's very different than most years that you celebrated and all over the world in terms of a Chevra Kadisha or people within the community, whether you're part of the Chevra or not, knowing that it's strange and different. And we're going to be hearing a lot about that from our panelists who are very blessed to hear their words from. And I wanted to start with a little bit of Torah, because we know Torah speaks to life and life speaks to Torah, and Torah speaks to death and death speaks to Torah. So I wanted to frame our learning and think about the ritual of Tahara, which is the purification of a body that we go through when somebody passes away in the Jewish community. For those who are a part of the Chevra Kadisha, you have maybe been a part of this more than once, of doing the purification of a body. For those who maybe are joining and are not a part of that, the ritual is for a group of people who are on the Chevra Kadisha to come and be with the body to clean the body with water, to purify the body with water, to dress the body in clothing, putting the body into the coffin or the ark, which is the language used in the Hebrew, and through this all really shepherding our loved community member into their next journey, and done with love. And so I want to look at a very specific piece of this journey and the liturgy that's used during a Tahara. And I'm going to invite people. Billy, how are we feeling about breakout rooms? Should we stay together or? So I'm going to invite people to join in a Chavruta, which is the traditional way of learning text together. So you'll have a chance to learn one-on-one with somebody else here. And I'm going to share the text here in the chat so that you have access to it. And we're going to be looking at and thinking about the connection between the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, and the experience of Tahara. What is the connection between Yom Kippur, because the high priest is going to be, is only going into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, and we use the liturgy and the language of this scene that's spelled out for us in Leviticus in the liturgy of, among other pieces of liturgy, but as a part of the liturgy of a Tahara. And I want to think about this connection, and then also we're going to take it into how has that maybe shifted and changed as we're going through a year of a pandemic. So I have a text ready for you. You'll have a few minutes to explore it. I have the Hebrew and the English of the Leviticus text. There are a few questions at the bottom. We may not have enough time to really get into it, but just enjoy. I'm going to invite you to introduce yourself to your Chavruta if you haven't had a chance, if you don't know them, or if you do know them but not well. And then you can jump in and read out loud, maybe share reading out loud in the English if you're comfortable there, the Hebrew. And if you get to the questions, great. If not, we'll have a chance to reflect together. So I will send you into your breakout rooms, and we'll wait until we go there. So if people are able to access the document, are you able to access the document in the chat? Okay, wonderful. So you'll have an opportunity maybe to look it over and really to think about what is the connection here maybe between what are we learning about both from the text, the Holy of Holies, and also the high priest, and what does this have to do with somebody who passes away? What does this have to do? What's the connection there? Thinking of the high priest, thinking of that Holy of Holies. And I spoke about this. I titled this, as you'll see, the Risk of Holiness. So I also want to think about what are the risks involved in being a part of this ritual, both for the high priest and also potentially when thinking about that and the Tahara. So we'll have a moment to do that. And if we're getting too much, Billy, we can just look at the text together here so you can tell me. Great. So as we're doing that, I'm just going to, I'll hum a little bit of it looks like people are shifting. So I'll hum a little bit as people are getting settled in their Chavruta. And this is from the liturgy of, that we sing when the Kohen Gadol, when the priest comes out of the Holy of Holies. So. Na 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 ya na 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 na. As people are trickling back in from Chavruta, I'll just continue singing the melody that we sing when the Kohen Gadol would come out of the Holy of Holies. We're so relieved that the Kohen Gadol made it out. So we sing this, and we'll just sing it as people trickle back in from Chavruta. Na 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 So just a thumbs up or a medium or down. How was the Chavruta experience? How did you feel in a breakout room? How did you feel learning text? I really threw you in there. So a few thumbs up. It's okay if it felt strange or different. I'm really appreciative of everyone being open to jumping into learning a little bit and also just getting the chance to really have a more connected experience on Zoom. So I'm just curious if there were thoughts, if people want to share just in the chat for a moment, any thoughts that came up for you, if you were able to get to the questions, if you just saw the text, but maybe what are you thinking about it if you've had the experience of doing a Tahara, or if you are just learning about Tahara for the first time, what would you think maybe the connection between Yom Kippur and the ritual we have of purifying our loved ones, our community members when they pass away? What would you think the connection there would be? I'm just curious to see if people wanted to share in the chat any of the thoughts that came up in your Chavruta. Great. Wow. We who perform the Tahara are the offerings. So maybe being a part of this holy experience and really giving a piece of yourself. Beautiful. Beautiful. Death and preparing for death on Yom Kippur. So right, Yom Kippur being that facing our mortality. Very moved by it. Yom Kippur as a rehearsal for Tahara, stripped of all, right? Yom Kippur is that rehearsal of our death. Great. And the Met is the high priest in isolation, right? So you maybe have that the body of our loved one is equivalent to the high priest. And that's exactly what we see in traditional text. What they say is through the liturgy, it's actually the Chevra Kadisha is almost like a group of angels who are preparing the mate and helping the mate prepare to meet the divine and go into the Holy of Holies. And the analogy of this is the clothing that you saw, those beautiful lines that you see from Vayikra 16:4, they're actually broken down as you do a Tahara and as you put the white tahrichim, the clothing onto the body, as you put on the headpiece, you speak about the headpiece. As you put on the shirt and the pants and each piece of it, you're breaking this down. And there's a beautiful, right, you're preparing this mate to go in for the Holy of Holies and to encounter God and to encounter the divine. And as I was thinking about this, it actually feels like right now things have been flipped a little bit around on its head, right? There's an idea that the risk here is what is the risk of going into the Holy of Holies, right? It says that the Kohen Gadol could only go in if wearing the right clothing, if prepared with the right sacrifices on Yom Kippur, right? It was a very scary thing for the Kohen Gadol. There was a risk of going and meeting and having this encounter. And I was thinking about what are the risks now, and thinking about the distance and the fear that the Chevra Kadisha experienced. And I feel as though actually what would happen if we thought about the members of the Chevra Kadisha, and some people hinted at this as being the high priests here. What would it look like? And to think about, and I was thinking about those who maybe are continuing to be on a Chevra Kadisha these days and putting on all the PPE and really dressing themselves to be prepared to go into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, into that holy space with the mate. But also that risk, right? What is that risk that we're taking when we go in there? And maybe not even during a pandemic, but maybe also just that risk we take when we're going into a room to do a Tahara, right? When we're going in to encounter death in such close proximity. What is the risk that we are taking? Whether it's the risk of fearing and seeing our own mortality, or potentially even today thinking of a Chevra Kadisha and doing having shomrim that are risking potentially their lives, and thinking about what it is to go into that holy space, that it's not just an easy decision to make, whether or not it's a normal time or whether it's right now. And I was thinking, and some people also put this in the chat, and I'm glad it came up in the conversations, the idea of Yom Kippur as being a moment when we face our own mortality. And right, being a part of a Chevra Kadisha, or when somebody passes away, we face our own mortality. We see it as a mirror in front of our eyes. And there's something I would say about the risk, right? You could say maybe it would make you feel like you couldn't wake up the next morning, right? Sometimes there's a fear that's associated with it. And sometimes, and what I would like to say about Yom Kippur and what I'm thinking about right now, even during a pandemic, even if we're not able to do Taharot in the same way, every day we are faced with our own mortality during a pandemic in a way that we usually maybe don't experience on our regular basis. And I'm thinking about what is it to think about that encounter with our mortality and how it actually sparks life and how it allows us to reflect on our lives and think about the ways we want to be living our lives. And I think this is exactly on Yom Kippur, right? We prepare and we almost practice our death in order to say, I am born again and I'm ready to live my life again. And so as a kavanah, as we think about how things have been topsy-turvy and just different and changed, and we have beautiful rituals that are coming out of this time, and also pieces of this that are painful and isolating and awful and horrible, and we are full of grief. I think the piece that I want to think about is, what is the risk of encountering death and this entire experience of a pandemic, and how are we actually risking living our lives in a new way, and bringing that and the learning and the teaching that we've all done over these past few months, and maybe we've been doing for years, as a part of the Chevra Kadisha or as a part of the community or yearly on Yom Kippur. But thinking about, again, that fragility and that fine line between death and what it has to teach us about the way we can and do cherish life, our own lives and the lives of those in our community and in the world. So with that, I will pass it over to our speakers, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to explore this with all of you.
Thank you, Becca. That was beautiful. Thank you. Before we begin, we'll be hearing from two experts in the field, as you know, who were in the trenches, especially in the beginning of this this pandemic. We will be having a Q&A with them later after they each speak for a bit. What I'll ask you to do is, if you have questions for them, to put it in the chat. And if you can chat it to everyone, or you can chat it just to Sharon Anstey, one of our chairs, she'll be reading those questions aloud for our speakers. If you have any problems with that, if it's easier for you to email me, if you have my email because you're on Chevra Kadisha or know me otherwise, I can also put my email in the chat. You can email that to me. So our first speaker tonight, many of you know her as she is a BJ member. Chaplain Linda Golding received her master's degree in Jewish Studies and a certificate in Pastoral Care and Counseling from JTS the spring of 2013, and became board certified chaplain through the Association of Professional Chaplains in 2014. She served as staff chaplain at New York Presbyterian Hospital, Columbia University Medical Center since 2010, caring for patients, family, and staff throughout the adult and children's hospital. She's a chaplain member of the hospital's ethics committee and its organ donor council, and leads regular didactics for chaplains, nurses, doctors, and medical students. Named a member of the inaugural 2020-21 Reach Fellowship Program sponsored by New York Presbyterian and ICAP under the aegis of Dalio Center for Health Justice. Golding also leads the 2021 Luch Foundation funded program, The Body Knows, which is a pilot to provide support to frontline hospital staff. She's also a current adjunct professor in the bioethics program at Columbia, at JTS, and upcoming at Union Theological Seminary as well. So thank you, Linda.
It's wonderful to see everybody's faces. It's funny how you can feel so close, right? Even in this crazy mosaic world. So, so I'm going to say a few things, and then I'm going to read something because I think it really goes to the heart of what we're talking about. All right. So I want to start with something that I picked up at the JCC. You may remember some years ago there was a vending machine at the JCC briefly that dispensed items from Pirkei Avot and other places. So I chose this one because it seemed right, and now I see this every day when I come home, when I leave home. It seems so relevant. So it's from Pirkei Avot, chapter 4. Treat no one lightly and think nothing is useless. For everything Sorry. Think nothing is useless, for everyone has a moment and everything has a place. And for me, that's a bit of what has happened over this last year. So starting in the middle of March, the chaplains suddenly became essential healthcare workers, and we were required to be on site at the hospital, but we couldn't really do what we do because there wasn't enough protective equipment, PPE. So we weren't seeing patients, we weren't seeing families, we were only seeing staff sort of at a rough distance. The hospital was empty of visitors, and we had to reinvent. And each one of us reinvent the chaplaincy sort of in the ways that we would normally express ourselves. So I'm kind of a facilitator, convener type. So I, with a psychologist, started 30 groups for staff support, which we did by Zoom. And then I started using the phone and Zoom and FaceTime to connect with families and to pass stories from the families about their loved one who was in the hospital, who they couldn't see, to pass those stories and sometimes photographs to the staff who were in the hospital, who would then put them up on doors. So really, the chaplain is always an ambassador, a bridge figure, but even more so. So I want to read something. Some of you have read it already, but I think it goes to the heart of what we're talking about. So one morning at the hospital, I asked a colleague, how is our small morgue managing to hold all the bodies during this pandemic? She took me to the window in her office and pointed to the two long refrigerator trucks, morgue extension trucks. At that moment, I began a daily practice of praying psalms to help provide comfort to the disoriented souls locked in the trucks, waiting to be released. I invited others to join me in offering this ritual in the virtual world in which we had begun to live. And many of you at BJ and other places joined me. And then a call came. Sometime in the next week, the medical examiner would be coming to collect unclaimed bodies, taking them to their new custom-built space in Brooklyn. Would I be present to pray? Yes, of course. This would be a chance to have a physical experience that the pandemic had stolen from us, from all of us, being with the dead, offering final prayers, helping the souls move through. Not quite a funeral, but something close. Unclaimed bodies, not unnamed or unknown, but unclaimed, because families couldn't afford burial, because funeral homes and cemeteries and crematoria were backed up, because some families cannot tolerate the death of this loved one and did not respond to calls, because the contact for the patient had become sick or had died. The call came one morning. The trucks are on their way. I sent a note of invitation to my chaplain colleagues, grabbed my book of Psalms, went to the location on our hospital campus. This would be our first transfer. The logistics were complex. A reconnaissance drone had been sent in advance to assess the traffic patterns and to provide guidance about the geometry of backing the trucks into the driveway from a two-way avenue. Security officers were in place to keep people from stopping and staring. Screens were placed. Parking attendants were redirecting cars. And on that sunny, windy day, I waited with members of management and administration downwind of the fuel fumes of our refrigerator trucks. When the medical examiners arrived, these trucks were equipped with tires as tall as my hip. The fresh young faces of soldiers in fatigues and the older, more wary faces of disaster mortuary specialists known as DMORTs drew close. We talked about home, about their deployment, about their usual work, about what they'd been doing during this time. Paperwork was completed, manifests with names, identification numbers, contact information were exchanged, and we were ready to begin. Each soldier, DMORT, and hospital staffer who would be handling bodies bodies that had already been twice wrapped before having been placed first in a regular body bag and then into a heavy duty bag. These folks sanitized themselves as fully as possible before zipping themselves into hazmat suits, white hazmat suits, adding gloves, masks, and goggles and hats in a ritual order and meaning. Those going into these morgue extension trucks would have headlamps. At first, the hazmat suits reminded me of the waders I wear when trout fishing. But these suits transformed each person from a recognizable individual to a set of moving body parts and eyes. It was the eyes I searched for emotion, for personality, for connection. I offered a word of encouragement in the sacred work that was to begin, and to let them know I would be with them the whole time. We had 50 bodies to resettle. I would bear witness with them. Without family at the time of death, the hospital staff became extended family for each of these people. Today, we would become another set of extended family, albeit an extended family that looked a little like action figures. The two morgue extension trucks were separated by a path covered with a long canopy, the kind of canopy with scalloped edges you might see at a wedding in danger of being rained out. Two people bring out the first gurney with the first body. I am reading Psalm 1. I like the early ones right now, as I feel they really speak the truth of the current circumstances. The heavy-duty body bag looks like a very loose-fitting skin diving suit with a name, a tag, handles, tabs, and a zipper. I look up to acknowledge the body and the soul of the person. I look to see the name. Two soldiers wait in the open truck to receive the body, and they touch it to make sure they know where the head is, and then pull the body into the truck. They pull and drag the body into the truck. I gasp as the body is dragged down the length of unshelved, unrefrigerated truck. I catch my composure and continue reading. This is not what I expected. Well, what did I expect? We fill one truck. A fresh crew of soldiers begins to fill the second truck. By the time I meet this new crew, they're already in their suits. I don't know who they are. And I realize that these are not soldiers and demorts wearing fishing waders. These are men and women in the white clothing of the Kohanim, the priests of long ago, complete with sashes and ties, purified and with rapt attention. The soldiers in the medical examiner trucks are at the entrance to a holy of holies, where God's presence resides, where we expect fire and smoke. The soldiers bringing the bodies down the canopied aisle are the Levites, the holy haulers. And I, perhaps a Levite reciting Psalms, but more likely Israel, watching and waiting and trying to be present to the sacred procession and rituals that approach this holy of holies. The priests focus intently as each body comes to them. They enact precisely choreographed movements to receive and move them into the recesses of the truck, which will take them to their next resting place, following their greatest possible sacrifice. We finish. Everyone removes their white suits and sanitizes as much of their bodies as possible while still wearing the work clothes. We have a word of gratitude for the sacred work offered. We ask forgiveness for any moment that may have been too rough or uncertain, as in Tahara. We ask for safe passage to Brooklyn, a smooth drive. The drivers ask for individual blessings. They lock the doors of the trucks with two locks, like the two body bags each person wears, a keyed lock, and then a device with a seal to ensure that the trucks have not been tampered with. Rifat Siriel ne'eman ki ata rofe uman, at roshi shur chalshi v'ten koach l'nafshi. Heal my pain, faithful God, for you excel at the art of healing. You are my guide, Look at my weakness and give strength to my soul. Amen. And thank you.
Thank you, Linda. That was very powerful. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Julia Iashra, MD, Executive Director of the Dalio Center for Health Justice at New York Presbyterian. In this role, she leads the center's efforts to address longstanding health disparities due to race, socioeconomic differences, limited access to care, and other complex factors that impact the well-being of their communities disproportionately. Established in 2020, the Dalio Center for Health Justice works collaboratively with representatives from New York Presbyterian, Weill Cornell Medicine, and Columbia Evangelos College of Physicians and Surgeons to be a leader in the understanding and improving of health equity and to drive action that results in measurable improvements in health outcomes for all. Dr. Iashra pursued a dual degree at Columbia Evangelos College of Physicians and Surgeons and Columbia Business School, graduating with an MD MBA in 2008. After completing her residency in internal medicine at Columbia, she stayed for a year as chief resident before joining the Division of General Medicine at Columbia in 2012. As a current assistant professor of medicine at Columbia University Irving Medical Center, Dr. Iashra continues to see patients as an internist in the section for hospital medicine. Dr. Iashra.
Thank you so much. And I have to say thank you, Linda. Linda and I have known each other for a number of years, and I had my heart stopped many times during your talk. I think that not only was it beautiful, but it gave me, it always is, it's part of my ability to provide some closure to the experience that I have had over the last year, is knowing that people were so respectful and there to provide some, some ritual, some meaning, to provide oversight, to give people some closure at death. So my experience has been, I don't know that you can classify it in one word for what 2020 and now into 21 has been for me personally, professionally. I think for many reasons, it has been a year of fear, a year of inability to feel comfort in the things that I have always felt comfortable in. And it has been a year of challenge and change. So I remember vividly one of the very first patients at New York Presbyterian in Columbia who we suspected who had COVID. We were sitting in, I'm a hospitalist, so I see patients in internal medicine, adult medicine at the hospital. And we were sitting in our team room and we're told there's a suspected patient with COVID in the emergency room. And I think everyone said, okay, are we ready for this right now? What do we do? And at that point, I don't think we knew what was going to come. I don't think we were prepared. I don't think we had any understanding of what the next year would be like in our lives. I was finished with my work. This wasn't one of my patients, but I didn't want anyone else to really have to take the risk of exposure. So I volunteered and said, I will suit up, go downstairs, and I'll help transport this patient to the hospital. And I remember walking into the room and that feeling of fear of, am I putting myself at risk? Am I going to get sick? Because we didn't know a lot at that point about the spread of disease, how communicable it was. The recommendations from the CDC were changing all of the time. And something that I had always felt comfortable with, which is medicine. That's something I've always come back to. No matter where I've been in my life and my career, I know my job. I know how to be a good doctor. And that was stressed so many times during the last year, where I didn't feel like I was a good doctor, where I couldn't get people's families with them before they died, where I was the only one at the bedside, where I was holding hands and saying, I'm with you. And I think that over the year, there's a sense of okay, we're starting to understand a little bit more about the disease, but yet we're still not feeling comfortable about how we are honoring death, because we can't have people in with our loved ones. And that's something I've always done throughout my entire career, is when I'm at all concerned that anyone is in the hospital getting sick, the first thing that we always do is make sure the family is with them, because we never want anyone to be alone. And we never want any family member to feel like they couldn't be there. So it's interesting, because when I think back to those moments of, expanding the ICUs, like adding new ICU space into every place of our hospital, all I can really remember is the noise. I don't actually have a lot of recollections about much of what we did. Every day felt the same. We developed rituals, and all I remember for months is just so much noise. All of the beeping, the talking, the building, the construction sounds, the monitor sounds, all of that was overwhelming at certain points in March, April, May, and into June. And I always had to counterpose that with my home life, which every day I came home, I took off everything I had on in my entryway. It went into a bag. That bag went into a closet. I took a full shower and put on completely new clothes. My shoes were separated, and I tried to do my best to make sure that I didn't bring home COVID to my house. And it was so silent in my home, because I live alone. My family is in Boston, and my friends are all doctors and going through the same experience with us, where we're afraid for ourselves, we're afraid for our families, we are afraid because we don't feel comfortable in medicine anymore, which has been everything we've ever known. And so we developed these rituals, these cleansing rituals for ourselves. But I always just remember how noisy and loud the hospital was versus how quiet my home was, and feeling like there's no in between. So it's either silent and you're by yourself, or it's so loud you can't think. And it wasn't until things started to get a little bit better over the summer that we started to feel like, okay, we can manage this. We can try to think about other ways to get families at the bedside. We understand more about the medicine. I'm feeling better about being a doctor, because I think we know what we're doing now, and we're doing the best that we can. And then George Floyd was murdered, and my world exploded yet again. And I think that it wasn't until actually in January of this year that I really sat with how much the last year has been a toll on me personally and professionally. And I had this overwhelming sense in mid-January, I won't say what the event was, where I just started crying and just like could not stop, feeling as though not only had the whole year unsettled me as a doctor, made me feel like I couldn't get families to be with their loved ones at death. I also saw more death than I ever have in my entire career. And so there was all of that, my own internal fear, my own feeling like I couldn't provide the care I wanted to provide. And there was all of the feelings around my career and my job, and that changed my sense of self. And then there was the settling and the feeling and the understanding of, how do I feel as a Black woman in the United States? And do I feel safe? And what does that mean in this country? And what does that mean for my future? And I think that it has been over time that I've really been able to reflect on how all of that feels, and how all of that can make you feel hopeless at certain times. Seeing so many Black and brown people die during the first wave of COVID, being at bedside with family members and not feeling like a good doctor. And I think it was actually through my new job, which is I'm the executive director of the Dalio Center, where my job is to try to make healthcare better. It's point blank, that's my job. Day in and day out, everything I do is to try to make healthcare better. And it's funny, there's a moment when I feel like the color came back in a world that was black and white for me. And that was actually when our CEO called me. I love my hospital. I love New York Presbyterian. I've been at Columbia my entire career. I love the people that work there. They have gotten me through so many moments of my life. My CEO called me and just said, Julia, how are you? How are you doing? And my answer was, I have no idea. I don't even know where to begin. I just came home from work yesterday. I can't even comprehend what that experience was right now. And there's protests outside my house, and I feel like I should be with them protesting. All I know is that things have to change, and we can't live this way anymore. And I don't know how to do that. And so I told him I was quitting my job. And let's just remember, I'm telling the CEO of our hospital, I'm quitting my job. Probably not the most brilliant move that I've had in the past year, but I think you can understand where I was coming from. And I said to him, we have to do something different. And so his response, and I'll remember this for the rest of my life, was, Julia, let's not quit your job just yet. I want every good idea that you have. Nothing is too big, nothing is too small. Throw it out there. Tell me everything that you have. It's like, that's going to take you at least 10 years. Then we can think about your next steps after that. And a few months later, I was appointed a vice president in the hospital and the executive director of the Dalio Center. And it was that ability to funnel all of that unease and the sense of self that I had lost, because medicine had always been my wheelhouse. It was to funnel all of that unhappiness with what I saw in the greater community into something that could be actionable. And I felt like I had a renewed sense of purpose. And it's that which has really made all the difference. So now when I think about my day-to-day and I think about what I can do and I think about the last year, I take all of that and I funnel that into making care better and closing those gaps in care and making sure that all of our Black and Brown people are vaccinated and protecting individuals that can't protect themselves. That's not to say that when I walk back into the hospital, my heart doesn't stop a little bit. When I walked back into the emergency room for the first time after the first wave had been over and I had taken a few months off of clinical time, I couldn't walk in. I had to stop and I was like, I can't do it today. I went the next day and I said, I'm going to do this today because I need to know that I can do this again. And I walked in, I went into a room where one of a very lovely patient of mine had passed, and I paid my respects. And I said, I will do everything I can in the future to make sure that we don't have the same thing happen to so many people that are vulnerable in our city and in our country. And now I go back in and I feel a renewed sense of hope and spirit. So, I think the last year has been all rolled into what it meant to me to be a doctor and how that was just shook to my core because of COVID. What it meant to be a person and how I felt like I couldn't let people have dignity in death because I couldn't give them their family. And now what it means to be a Black American and being able to really change the future for everyone else in our country. So it's been a rocky year. I won't say it's had its ups and it's had its downs, definitely. But I think that, looking towards the future, I have nothing but hope. I have nothing but excitement for what we can do and what we can do together. So I'm really honored to be part of this community tonight. I've actually only felt so much love and peace and hope and harmony here. So thank you for letting me share my story with you. And I'm happy to share any and all questions. And Linda, I will see you on Monday.
So I don't want to detract from these two extraordinary presentations, but I just want to take a moment. First, Susan is the only person who has done what she normally does. The rest of us haven't, and she always needs more help. So if you have time to help with Shloshim calls, be in touch with Susan. She'd be glad to have you. And I will be around before too long because we will be making pre-Pesach calls. Also, just a moment, this is the Helen Radin Memorial Teaching. Helen was mom to many of the rabbis. She was the gateway. She was, I think, when I think of Helen, I think of mom and determination. Those of you who are here early on for Eva's chant heard her strength, her warmth, and her gentleness in her voice. And it's with very mixed emotions that I'm sharing that she and Larry are moving to Denver, and we are going to be losing her as a chair. Both their daughters are there. It makes sense. She works with Aleph, and she got smicha in Colorado, so it holds a big place in her heart, but it's certainly our loss. Eva agreed to serve as chair about 7 years ago, and over this period we've been graced with her serenity, her emotional intelligence, her desire to push us in new directions. And although she is certainly given to other communities, including the Shul of New York, where she serves as rabbi, her commitment to BJ and the Chevra has never wavered. Her presence, where are you? I can't see you, but I'm still seeing Julia, but my heart is with you. Her presence has been a blessing and we will miss her. And when I spoke of mixed emotions, I'm very excited for her and very sad for us. And now I'm sure you guys have questions, so I think you might as well publish them to everyone, and Julia and Linda can take whatever questions come.
Cool.
So seeing I have the floor, I actually have, as Julia was talking, those of us who have done Tahara and have now not done Tahara for a very long time, I think there is a huge element of fear concerning the first time we step back into that room, both the women and the men. And I don't know when we are going to be given the green light to do that. So Julia, hearing you sort of gave me more courage because I know we will have to climb that high mountain when the day comes.
I got a direct message, if a question sent directly to me in the chat, which is just, what are some of the activities or action steps that I'm taking now? And I'll
wait. I didn't hear who was speaking now.
Hi, this is Julia. I got a question in the chat box. So, which is, what are some of the activities and action steps that I'm taking now? And I think there's both personal action steps and then what I'm doing professionally, which excites me a little bit more. So personally, I think one of the things that I actually really have to commend Linda for is taking a moment for yourself and to recognize that we are all hurting during this last year, and self-reflecting and giving myself breathing space was very important. We were working nonstop. I mean, 11-hour days, weeks at a time, and there wasn't any moment to reflect on how I was feeling about any of this. And then when I did have moments of reflection, it was just to be overwhelmed by everything. So now I've actually built in a lot of breathing space for myself. This afternoon, I didn't really have the time, but I made the time to go for a walk. Yes, it was in the snow. Yes, I got pelted with snow, but it felt amazing to just feel like I was in nature and that I was part of the world and part of the community. So taking moments for myself has been really wonderful. But then in terms of my job, which thrills me, a lot of the work we're doing now is, so a substantial portion of it is around vaccine education and vaccine hesitancy. And there will be some exciting things that we're working on, which I hope make it to national stages in the next couple of weeks. Also doing a lot of work within our hospital to look at all of our clinical strategies programs and make sure they're equitable. Make sure that how we provide care is equitable across all dimensions. So not just racially, ethnically, but in terms of language, socioeconomic status, insurance payer. And, I think the really wonderful thing is that as we think about redesigning some of our practices, as we think about redesigning how we deliver care, there's been nothing but support at our organization. So New York Presbyterian, Columbia, and Cornell are all in and have said, we want to make care better. So it's building new relationships with our community partners. It's holding ourselves accountable and creating metrics and dashboards that we can look at to say, are we equitable? And if we're not, how can we be? So there's a lot of initiatives, and I can throw in the chat our website for the Dalio Center so you can see, because it enumerates all the work we're doing. But most of it is in really making sure that the care we provide is that same high standard, gold standard care for everyone, regardless of who you are, regardless of how you pay, doesn't matter where you've come from. That's the standard we'd hold ourselves to. So in shorter terms, long-term work we're going to be doing is in women's and children's health. But short-term, we're doing a lot of things within the hospital.
Actually, I'm just going to sort of add to that I feel the difference in the hospital. There's a shift. There's a shift of acknowledgement that there are things that need to be done better. And there's a shift of people actually admitting that they didn't know that there were these disparities, which I think sometimes, I mean, Julie and I have heard people say this, right? And it's like, really? You didn't notice? But it wasn't out of mean-spiritedness that people didn't notice. It's just like, you know, for decades, the only information we had about heart attacks was based on men, because that's who was measured. But it turns out women have a different sort of experience. And Dova wrote in about any new rituals that I've developed. So this is really interesting. I saw that come in. I was like, I really need to think about that. What are those new rituals? So I think the truth is that for me, you know, most of you know, I spent decades, 30 years in the music business, which is, you know, pretty ritualized, right? It's theater. So for me, rituals are really pretty internal. And I think what's happened to me over this last year is that all the artifice has dropped away. So I'm really happy that people are developing new rituals. I really thought I would be one of those people, but it turns out I'm not. It turns out that I have also been really stripped of a lot of things. And it has helped me understand that others have also been really stripped, right? Part of the chaplain's job is to allow the other person to really come through, right? Without my filter. And so we are all sort of stripped down together. And I think that everything I do is actually slower than it was, right? I think the experience of not going out, right? Of not doing all the things that are part of living in New York, part of being in the world that we've cultivated here. I think not doing that has really helped me, consider what a relationship with another person really is. And so I'm happy to provide ritual for people. I'm happy to always invent stuff on the spot, but you know, Dova, was so interesting to feel myself squirm at your question, right? So I think what's happened to me, and maybe this has happened to others, is I have become more of who I am, not who I'm expected to be. This question from Shuli for both of us. What have you learned in the past year that you will take forward when the pandemic is over? You mean it's going to be over? What will you be doing differently in your work because of what you've experienced? I think we've talked about it, actually. Yeah? Is there other stuff that you want to add, Julia?
I think one of the things that I will take with me is actually something that you just said so beautifully, that I am more of who I am now. And I think that All of the artifice is stripped away. All of the things that I thought were important to me were not. And I think it was, I'm very close with my family. And I don't think I realized how much fear my mother had. My sister's also a doctor. Her husband's a doctor. They were both taking care of patients at Mass General. And I don't think how much I understood how scared my mom was for the three of us taking care of patients all of the time. And I couldn't see her. So, traveling to Boston was out of the question. And it wasn't until I think the first time I saw my family was maybe over the summer. So I hadn't seen them in 8 months, something like that. And I used to see my family once a month. I'm very close with them. And I got to sit with my mom and really talk with her. And we had grown to the point where, she was texting me a lot during the pandemic, a lot. I mean, it was a lot, but it's built, I have a closer relationship with her now because of it. She did send me a lot of things like Clorox wipes and masks and all of these things. I was like, Mom, thank you. I know you're looking out for me. You don't need to do that. So it's wonderful. But I became closer with who I loved. My friends and I just tightened in terms of our circle. And I think it was very clear to me what was really important to me in my life. As I said, I used to see my family, who I have a nephew who's 14 and twin nieces who are 10, and they are the light of my life. I adore them to no end. And it's going to make me tearful. When I finally saw them, one of my nieces, was very sullen and very quiet on the day I had to leave. And, we weren't sure what it was about. And finally, as I'm getting ready to leave, she starts sobbing. And she grabs me and she's like, please say you'll come back. Please come back. You have to come back. Auntie, we miss you so much. Please come back. And it was then that I realized, like, this is what I will take with me into the rest of my life, is this connection I have with those that love me and that I love. And I will make time for them. I will do whatever it takes to make sure that I can share in this with them. And then part of that takes again with me into my work, because my job is to be able to give that to other people too. So I need to make sure that I can get families to see their loved ones. And if that means that I have to be with an iPad at bedside or a phone or figure it out, we will do it, because we want everyone to have that same feeling of my niece wrapped around my arms saying, don't leave, please come back. So I think that's what I really take with me is, all of those relationships and connections that were already strong to begin with, but now are what fortify me every day.
So just in the chat, Helene Bleiberg has a question. What have you both found that has provided comfort for families in the absence of the usual rituals after someone has passed?
You all have participated in many of the Zoom Shiva meetings. Where instead of being able to sit with each other in person, we've been in this virtual space. And, there's something that's been really remarkable about that. And that makes me think, the intensity, the intimacy, the ability to have people from all over the world, not just the people who could get there today. That makes me think that part of what gives people comfort is connection. People often ask, and Julia, I'm sure you're getting these questions, like, how do you manage? And I've been at a loss for a while to get language that made sense, right? I'm one of those people, I put my head down, I do it. I had a lot of feelings, right? But somebody the other day said something about this, about connections. and just as Julia was saying about making those connections, like understanding those connections in a different way, having them be more central, which I think, you know, in New York, we're so kind of provincial, right? You know, we think we know it all. But the reality is that people who don't live in a city like New York really are connected to people very profoundly. And I think that's what I've learned from family members who have lost someone who couldn't go through the usual ritual mourning. So I actually led a funeral in September, and I said yes before I realized how bizarre that was. And, you know, the rituals were much reduced. The time was much reduced. The spacing was bigger. And yet you could really feel the connection between the 10 people who were there. And I felt that connection because I had been invited into it. So I think another part of that is that if we allow ourselves to be invited in, easier said than done, right? You know, Sharon was saying there's always fear and anxiety, right? Of all sorts. I was very anxious before we started this evening. You know, I mean, it's there. If we can allow ourselves to be invited in, we model for other people that it's okay to invite people in. And that inviting, that connection is something to be cultivated and not collected.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned inviting people in, because I think one of the things that we did early on as physician groups was we didn't talk about how we were doing. We just sort of put our heads down and said, don't think about it. Don't think about what you see every day. Don't think about how hard this is, because if you stop to think about it, you won't get back into the hospital the next day.
Yeah.
How could you see all this all the time and still be okay? And I think it was pretty early on when we launched an initiative where it was two physicians talking to each other and asking, how are you doing? What do you hope for? And I think it really opened a space to say, it's all right for us to be honest with how we're feeling right now, and to actually show to people that this is really hard, and that, you know, I internalize and take with me every patient that I wasn't able to save. I think about them. I think about, you know, did I do all of the right things to make sure that that they had a peaceful death? And I think that, you know, it wasn't, and I think it was actually important for people to see that we were struggling too, that it wasn't like we weren't the automatons and robots that came in and we weren't fazed by what was going on. Like, no, we had we had a hard time. And I think it was really bonding. I also am really fortunate that two of my best friends in life happen to also be doctors at Columbia, who I have known my entire career. And we were there for each other every day. So the phone calls where you're crying because you think like you can't do it anymore, or the phone calls, I mean, my cell phone was always on me because I would have colleagues that called and said, I don't know what to do. I can't go back in the room. And I was like, we can do this together. You're going to do this. We'll talk about it. We'll figure this out. I will support you. You are an amazing doctor. And I think that's really where people felt so terrible, is because you felt like you weren't a good doctor anymore. And I think just helping people process all of that was inviting people into our experience and to say, we actually aren't okay, but we're doing the best that we can, and we're going to get through this together. So I do think that invitation is important. I think being open with how things feel is important. And I think it allowed us to take a deep breath and to say, it's okay now. It's okay not to be okay.
Mm-hmm. You know, that's so beautiful. how you're talking about the two physicians talking to each other, and each of you just like staying in touch and being able to help each other revise expectations, right? Which is one of the keys to resilience, right? And when I teach up at at the hospital, I always say, so we're at Columbia. I'm not talking about lowering the bar. I'm just talking about revising your expectation of yourself and of others, right? Because most people, most of the time, are doing the best they can. And we get out of the habit of that. So I'm not suggesting complacency by any stretch. I'm just as competitive as everybody else, right? But understand where you are, understand the context. And if we go to that moment of George Floyd's death and understand it as a wake-up call, but also as a unifying call, which I think is a struggle, right? Not everybody feels that way. But to have this Band-Aid so fully torn off and to witness, thousands of people on the campus who hadn't been, closer than 5 feet, 6 feet in months, right? They were like on top of each other, thrilled to be close and to have this intensity. And then suddenly realizing, oh, we're not supposed to do this. But this moment of unity and of the letting in, I think it's a big learning for us. I'm quite sure there's Torah in it all over the place, right? I don't know where.
It is.
Could I ask you both a question? I was kind of up at New York Presby for 34 years in the School of Public Health, and I worked with docs in a variety of the departments, basically doing research, translating their questions into research questions. And I saw two things that I'm curious about whether it's changing. One is that doctors were trained to view death as a failure, their failure. There was nothing positive about death. And if anything, it made some doctors uncomfortable. So they wanted to kind of walk away from the situation when they realized there was nothing more they can do. The other side of it was kind of the palliative care, more hospice-oriented approach. And in some ways, I think both of those conceptions of death got tested in this past year. You were set up, Julia, to feel the way you felt because you've been trained to feel, if I can't save, I'm failing my patient. And hopefully you'll tell me that one of the things that's going to happen now is a rethinking of that. But also the whole palliative care approach in the chaos and the resource shortage. I can't imagine how you could offer that approach to patients. So there must have been a tremendous set of feelings by people who have worked to really approach death differently in the hospital and found themselves unable to do so. So I'm just curious about.
So I think, and it's kind of interesting because prior to the pandemic, I think we've done a lot of rethinking how we as doctors approach death and dying. And I actually don't feel it as a failure. I think my job is to do the best that I can and work with our patients and their families and come to an agreement around, from all of us of what we are going to do. And I actually have been, I lead a lot of conversations around end of life and feel very comfortable talking to people about the end of life and how we can respect people and their wishes and the family's wishes. But I think the problem with the pandemic was that things were so fast and things were changing so quickly in terms of what the medicine was. So we didn't feel like we ever knew until we were well in the midst of pandemic what the medicine we should be doing was. We started with hydroxychloroquine, we stopped hydroxychloroquine. We started with early intubation, we stopped early intubation because we hadn't really encountered this before. And so I think that's what made us feel like we don't feel like good doctors yet, because we don't have a mastery of the medicine. And I think once you master the medicine part of it, then you can feel like, okay, I'm doing everything that I can. And now I can talk to families about end of life. We have done everything we can. But I think that feeling of, I don't know the medicine just yet. And there was no way for us to know, but still, I mean, we have been trained and studied for years and years to know the medicine. And so to feel uncomfortable in that space was really hard. And I also think that, you know, one of the things that we really do pride ourselves on, or I have always taken pride in, is really forming meaningful relationships with families and making sure that I can get the family there. Because I've had patients before where we couldn't get the family there in time. And it's something that sits with me, of making sure that we can do that. Like, I owe my patients that. I owe the families that. And I think that's where we felt like we couldn't do anything different. But that's where we felt like this doesn't feel good, because this person is dying with us and we are with them, but we're not their loved one. We're not their mom or their sister, and their sister is on the phone and wants to be there, and we can't do that. And I think that's where we started to it was devastating. I'll just be honest, it was devastating in many senses, because you wanted so much to be able to forge that lasting moment for someone, and to be able to have that love as they died. And we were very, very poor proxies for that. We tried as much as we could. And I think that's what felt like we weren't doing a good job, is we were working with what we had and the confines of what we had. But, you know, coming from a world where I've been in a large hospital institution my entire career, we have never really worried about medicine shortages or shortages of PPE, or not being able to have this very esoteric test. Like, we've always been able to say, okay, let's try this, let's work with someone. And we always had time. And I think when you no longer have the time, everything feels unsettling. So we did learn a lot during the first initial weeks of the pandemic. And I have to give it to our palliative care team. They were so supportive of us, of the patients, of the families. I actually don't know how they did it, because they took my fears as well and helped me work through them. They took the family's fears. They saw every patient that we asked them to, and really helped us to start conversations and help us, because it's really unnatural in a lot of ways to carry this over a Zoom or over a phone. So I think we did learn a lot, but if we can get back to a place where we can have families with us again, and the hospital isn't noisy because of all the beeping and all of the construction sounds, but is, alive with the sounds of voices and people, that will make me feel like we have recovered from the pandemic. So I do know doctors do feel like, oh, we have to do everything, but I think we've understood a lot more about our role in medicine and what we can do and how we should approach care. But I think the pandemic specifically stressed our ability to feel comfortable in the medicine, and that's just a hard place to be.
It's Miriam. I want to not ask a question, but make a comment. I've dealt for the past year as a chaplain, like Linda, chaplain and rabbi, doing bereavement work for the people who have died, for the spouses and also the adult children of the people who have died in hospitals. And especially for those whose spouse or parent died of COVID, it has been excruciating for them that they were not able to be with their loved one during the time when they died. However, it's also been excruciating for the people whose loved one died during the time of the pandemic, because they've not been able to participate in our normal Jewish rituals of having a normal funeral with people gathered around, a normal shiva with people who are there, who can hug them and hold them, and who after the shiva can come and hug them and hold them, and with whom they can be after the shiva and hold them physically. So mourning and grieving has been exponentially so very much harder during this year. And what's been wonderful is that hundreds and hundreds of people have come to the Jewish board within the year to find bereavement support, both individually and in groups. And it's been really, really tough for people this year. Mourning, grieving, so hard during this pandemic, and they still can't gather.
Right.
Even
No,
though they're slowly
absolutely
getting vaccines, it is so, so hard.
No, absolutely. That is, of course, true. It's been awful for people. But I want to also just sort of make a bridge between the care providers and the family members. You know, there is this intensity of relationship that happens between care providers and patient, and care providers and family. And so there's a grief, a bereavedness, you know, for the care providers as well, which we haven't yet totally sorted out a place for, right? Because it has to be created. I mean, luckily there are bereavement groups for families, you know, where this can be, people have some space, right, to be let in, to connect. And Miriam, one of the things that I wanted to say also in response is that for those of you who are sort of psychologically minded, there's a really terrific theory called ambiguous loss, which nowadays sort of lots of people have heard about. But 10 years ago, 12 years ago, it was pretty unheard of. And it's, put simply, it's there but not there. And so to listen to people who have lost somebody during a pandemic is to begin to think about their experience as if they lost somebody in 9/11 who they couldn't find, or in Vietnam War, you know, somebody who was missing in action or a POW. This sense of inability to really get it. And so, yes, the grief is different and longer, and can freeze day-to-day life. So those of you who are, right, yes, of course, Bonnie, or in the Holocaust, right, absolutely, or any of these genocides that we are experiencing now, this uncertainty, like I can't get my mind around it, is something to listen for, right? Even if people haven't lost a person, we have all lost a piece of ourselves. And so to be mindful, and I'm very aware of that particularly when I'm in the hospital, of the staff. And Julia, you put it very elegantly, you know, this loss of a piece of identity that we've taken for granted. But I want to be clear that we have all been through a version of this. We have all given something up that we didn't plan to. Nobody actually asked us, right? It happened. And the healing, I think, is going to have to be these step-by-step ways of seeing each other for who we really are, being who we really are. We may find that friendships have fallen away, right, for any number of reasons, or relationships have intensified, or there are new friendships because we're different. And I think this is a piece of what I feel privileged to witness in the hospital. I mean, I'm with Julia. I love New York Presbyterian Hospital. I love working there, right? We all joke about it a lot, right? You know, it's like, absolutely. But, you know, these are people who actually mean what they say. They're doing the best they can to move things forward. So let us come along as well. Let us provide hope. Let us look for hope, right? Discover hope. And find ways to resettle ourselves. I'm not even sure that's the right phrase, but to find our way. I think that's part of what you're saying also, Julia, about the learning new medicine, right? In a hurry, is to where is that path? I know that path is here. Would you help me shine that light on that path, right? Let me help, right? It's a different place. And I do think it's important for us to own our own pieces of it and to allow the space for healing.
I think I one other thing that, I guess, two closing thoughts. One is that experiences like this are moments of healing, both for me and I hope for others, as you start to talk about what the last year felt like. And I think that, it's always an honor for me to be invited into these spaces to talk about my own experience, because it then helps me rebuild that little piece of, who I was when I had that identity of I am a doctor and I know my craft. Because I get to think about, okay, well, I did do the best that I could with what I had available to me at the time. And I think that we all have lost pieces of ourselves, but that doesn't mean we're broken. It just means that we have to rebuild in a different way. And I think that's where I am, is that I did lose something of myself, but I don't think I'm the worse for it. I actually think I can build myself stronger now that I know at my core what is fundamental to me. And I think, we all take our own experiences with us in a different way. But I would say, I think it's just so meaningful to be here to talk about this. And I would hope that, me sharing part of my story is helpful for you to think about your own experience during the last year. Because I know that, every time I think about, I started with my heart racing when Linda started talking. I had a few moments of reliving there. And now I feel just so welcomed. And I think it's that moment. It's that being able to close a little piece of what had been torn or hurt from the past year that's important. So thank you for having me this evening. It was really a pleasure.
So I want to say a huge thank you to Julia and to Linda for sharing your stories, not just your intellectual analysis of how death and dying and mourning has changed in the COVID period, but also really sharing from your hearts and your souls of your own experience and pain and growth. It's so moving to hear that, and I thank you for that. For those who don't know me or who I don't know, I'm Shuli Passo. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at B'nai Jeshurun. So I have the wonderful gift of working with Billy and with the chairs of the Chevra Kadisha and with so many of our volunteers. And I think what you both were saying at the end really brings us back to the teaching that Becca brought to us at the beginning, that this was something that I really stood out to me that I had never thought about before, is that the process of imbuing the corpse with holiness, of actually saying that by placing the turban and the linen garments and reciting these verses and saying this body is tantamount to the high priest, is saying that the moment of loss can actually be a moment of holiness. It has the potential for that, which I think is what I've been hearing and what you've been saying, that there is so much that has been learned, and we've lost some of ourselves, and we've lost some of, certainly we've lost people, but we may not be the worse for it. That actually, if we find our way through this, we will come out with a greater holiness in our worlds, in our equitable healthcare systems, in the way we understand what it is to be a human being, in our commitment to caring for each other in community and showing up in the ways we need to, and asking for help in the ways that we can enable another person to give to us. So I think all of these reflections have been really inspiring as we, mark, really today is in the Hebrew calendar is the anniversary of the first confirmed case of COVID in New York. March 2nd was the first case. March 3rd was the second case in New York, the New York City area. And that's the 6th and the 7th of Adar, which is the date in the Hebrew calendar. January 20th was the first confirmed case in the United States. And as of today, I just looked up the numbers. 56,973 new confirmed cases in the United States, 612,989 globally. So there are still many, many people in this moment who are suffering, and whose families and loved ones are suffering, and who are in need of the learning and the wisdom and the compassion that people like you, Linda and Julia, and all of our volunteers, all of you here, are bringing to your work or your volunteer work. And I do want to just take a moment before we close to just be in silence, in remembrance of those who have died in this past year plus because of the pandemic. 495,180 people in the United States, and 2,430,96 people globally. And I think, as many of us know, the Jewish tradition teaches that each person is a world unto themselves. And that's a lot of worlds that we have lost. So let's hold that for just a minute. Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, our God and God of our ancestors, please give us the strength and the wisdom to allow the losses that we have experienced over this past year to bring us to a new place of holiness, to help us find our way, to help us help others find their way, so that we can come through this period of loss and mourning with a new respect for life and a new commitment to building a world in which everyone can live and flourish fully in community, in relationship, and with love.